Thank you all for coming. I want to welcome you. Um, we're talking about mandated shunning. So by, in particular by faith-based groups. And a lot of people have compared it to an invisible prison because when you're being shunned by your former faith group, you cannot reach out to and talk to your former friends and family, and they can't reach out and talk to you. But those bars are invisible to society in general. Is it hard? Should I hold this closer? Um, so can you please raise your hand if you have personally experienced or witnessed mandated shunning? Okay, quite a few. And now a follow-up question. Could you raise your hand if you have shunned someone else because it was prescribed by a group? They usually go hand in hand. It's estimated that there are between 40 and 100 million victims of shunning around the world. But if we then also figure that those people are being shunned by people in their group who are also victims because they're forced to participate in this behavior really against their will. And then we also consider the family and friends of the victims who are affected. It really is a very widespread problem. So 2 years ago, the Open Minds Foundation initiated their flagship program, Stop Mandated Shunning, and we've started collecting stories from around the world. We've gotten some fascinating responses from people, and I'd like to share a few of these very powerful quotes. If you want to see more of our story, you can go to our website, Stop Mandated Shunning, and there's right at the top, one of the tags is for stories. And I can only read 2 or 3 of them at a time, and then I need to take a break because they're hard to read. They're very powerful. But I wanted to share some voices from this invisible prison. One of the examples is Mary Byler. She is a former Amish woman from the United States. She told us, Amish parental love is often a transactional type of love. It's conditional on the Amish child complying with the rules established by the church and hierarchy to control community members. As long as you obey the rules, you are loved. But if you do not, for example, become baptized, pressure is applied by your family, church, and community to comply. If you don't comply at some point, it will be time to shun you. Another voice from the invisible prison is Lauren from the Zhuang Revival Center. She says, the result of the shunning enforced by my church is that I now have no contact with my family or the people I thought were my true friends. The most painful loss for me has been my sisters. I grew up with 3 siblings. I haven't had a proper relationship with them in 12 years. My family tells people that they aren't really shunning me. They say that if I wanted a relationship with them, I could go back at any time. And while that might seem true on the surface, what they don't say is that there's a condition. I must return to what they believe is the one true church. And Lauren is becoming an activist herself, and she created this poster on a website that she's starting, and she gave me permission to share it with you. She wants to emphasize that this is a human rights violation. And then here we have Miriam Rincon from the United States, and she left the Jehovah's Witnesses just a couple of years ago and was courageously willing to do an interview with me. So we'll hear what how she describes being in this invisible prison.
She would just see how hurt this made me. Losing people in life, and sometimes people don't understand what that means. But it just means that people see you as, like you said, you no longer exist in the world. They see you literally standing right in front of you, but they have to pretend as if you no longer exist in the world. And that is just the most hurtful thing. Yeah, because I tell my husband, like, I don't understand how my mom can treat me like this. I already have a brother who passed away 16 years ago. I miss him so much. And I think, my mom, I can never see him. We can never see him again. And here I am. I'm right here. I'm right here.
And so this is the overview of our presentation today. We're going to have John and Stephanie explain about the Open Minds Foundation and the Stop Mandate Shunning Project and their collaboration with Roehampton University. We're going to get some really fascinating information, the early results of this exclusive research and what it's shown us so far. The focus is on particularly the 6 groups: Scientology, Hasidic Jews, Baha'i Faith, Amish, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Exclusive Brethren. But there are people from other groups who have already shared their stories, and they're very willing to talk to anyone who has experienced mandated shunning, and anyone can fill out the survey if they feel they have experienced that. We'll hear some mental health insights from a trauma therapist. I will share my journey as a survivor onto activism. We'll talk about how all of us can take action to make change happen. If you're okay, just please save any questions you have until the end, and then all of us will make ourselves available for questions at the end. So first, I would like to introduce John Muhlenberg, and he is a former elder. He's been shunned for 30 years by 2 of his 4 children who are still part of the Jehovah's Witness organization. And he brings a lot of talent, his professional background with an experience with nonprofit and board leadership. And then he'll be joined with his wife, Stephanie, who is a passionate advocate for human rights. And she brings a very useful and powerful perspective as an outsider who has observed this and the damage, the social and emotional toll that shunning takes on so many members of families.
Thank you, Monica. You mentioned I am talent. I don't know that that is accurate, but I'll do my best. Just a quick question. Those in the audience, how many are ex-Jehovah's Witnesses or currently Jehovah's Witnesses? Okay, so I will have to explain some of the terms I'm going to use. As Monica said, my wife Stephanie and I are going to explain a little bit, very brief, the history of Open Minds Foundation, which is the nonprofit under which the Stop Mandated Shunning Project was founded. First of all, I need to go to the slide. Monica did refer to the invisible prison, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how I ended up there, and some of my children are still there. The history on me, I want to explain this, and my wife will do the same for herself. A little bit of my history, so you'll understand why I'm motivated to participate in and be part of Open Minds Foundation and the Stop Mandated Shunning Project. My parents started studying with Jehovah's Witnesses when I was 4 years old. So me and 5 other siblings were brought into that church. Very quickly, we were indoctrinated. By the time I was 8, I was giving talks in the congregation. By the time I was 12, believe it or not, I dedicated my life to this organization. And it's important to note that this is an aspect of Jehovah's Witnesses that is encouraged. When children really don't understand life in the world around them, they're expected to dedicate their lives to this organization, to Jehovah God. By the time I was 18, I graduated high school, and I began the pioneer work. This is a full-time, uncompensated ministry for the church. And that occupied a lot of my time. By the time I was 21, they had initiated the elders program, and I became an elder in the church, which again seems rather premature for a young man. In my mid-20s, I started to do reading, contra to what the organization recommends, of periodicals outside of what the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society prints. And among those magazines I read were science magazines. I was always curious about science, and in doing so, I found many issues that went contrary to what I was taught for my entire life. So I had this cognitive dissonance that started. It was the seed of doubt, but it took quite a few years and events before it became so obvious that I went to the state of what ex-Jehovah's Witness community calls PIMO, P-I-M-O, physically in and mentally out. So I was just going through the motions. I was pretending to be a Jehovah's Witness. By the time I was in my 30s, it got to the point where I stepped down as being an elder. I stopped doing the door-to-door preaching work that you may be familiar with. And it was pretty obvious to me that mentally I had checked out. But in 1986, my wife, then the mother of my 4 children, gave birth to twins, identical twins, very premature twins. They were 1 pound, 11 ounces. To demonstrate how small and fragile they are, I took my pinky and placed it in the palm of their hands in their incubators. There was a reflex. Their hand closed around my pinky. It went 2/3 of the way. That's how small and fragile they were. The doctors told us at the time that they had a 5% chance of living, 0% if they didn't get blood. And as some of you will know, that is contrary to the teaching of that organization. They believe that blood transfusions are against God's will because he demands not to eat blood. It was at that time I had to make a very powerful decision. I told the doctors, get them blood no matter what it takes. They did survive. Here they are with their older sister. And that's when they just got home from the hospital after 4 months in incubators. And then they started to grow, cute little kids. When I look at these pictures, I smile until I realize right there, they're getting indoctrinated at the very tender age of 2. And they are reading a book that's published by our society called Paradise Lost, The Paradise Regained. And it has very graphic pictures of people dying at the Battle of Armageddon. So we were imprisoning those children even then. They eventually grew. Here is a picture of them graduating from high school, beautiful young ladies. The one on the right went on to get a teaching degree, married what is termed a worldly man, and is doing very well. And she and her husband have a great relationship, my wife and I. The one on the left soon dedicated her life to the organization, and she started shunning me. And that's been going on for over 20 years now. So you can see there's a lot of reason, motivation for me to want to be participating in Open Minds Foundation and stop mandated shunning. So the history of this organization, very briefly, there were a group of men who shared the same experience when it came to shunning. Back in 2015, the man on the left, Jim Haeck, had 2 very close relatives that were involved in Scientology and received a lot of damage from that. Patrick Haeck in the center was born into the Jehovah's Witness organization and spent most of his adult life there, but grew to realize that the teachings were not true, and he saw the harm of mandated shunning. And he said to me one time, I looked forward, not forward, but ahead to being on his deathbed. And he said, if I had not done all I could to stop this evil practice of mandated shunning, he would not be very pleased with himself. So he became involved. And the gentleman on the right, Richard Kelly, many of you may know him. He's been very active in the past in ICSA. He was born into the religion as well. He figured out soon after having gone to Bethel, the headquarters of the organization back then, that this wasn't the truth. And he left, got disfellowshipped, as they call it now, removed from the church. And he was shunned. And he also experienced the murder of his sister by an abusive husband, mostly because of the practices of the church and how it did not handle that situation well. So, as a result, these 3 came together and founded this nonprofit Open Minds Foundation, and its main mission is to identify and work against coercive control. And one of the chief tools for working against this evil is critical thinking. So the organization is working hard to get critical thinking taught in schools around the world. We have had a modicum of success in the UK. We now have curriculum that is available to thousands of teachers there that help young students to think critically. My wife is working with organizations in the U.S. to accomplish the same thing, and we're making a steady progress in that regard. Stephanie now, my lovely wife, you didn't pay me to say that, will explain a little bit about her background, her motivation, and then what is happening with regard to Stop Mandated Shunning Project.
Well, when I met John 14 years ago, I knew absolutely nothing about the harmful practices of the religion that he was raised in. He did say to me, oh, sorry, let me put that closer. Thank you for letting me know. John did say to me early on that 2 of his 4 children would not speak to us. And at the time I said, well, that'll make it easier for me. That's fewer birthdays for me to remember. But I soon found that the harms that he had suffered and the pain that he suffers to this day were at the hands of religion that purports to be a Christian religion. I was raised in the Episcopal Church, which some call Catholic light. I was not forced to genuflect or, thank God, to go to confession. And I escaped the death threats of a so-called loving God. My father was strictly a C&E guy. My mother made him dress up on Christmas and Easter and presented a united front. I went for the choir and the cookies, and but somehow escaped a lot of the dogma and the ideology. I'm spiritual, but not religious anymore. And as John connected with Open Minds Foundation, he asked me to sit in on some of the board meetings, and I felt called to add some expertise from various boards that I had been on, and a brief stint as the chief fundraiser for Goodwill Industries in our local town. It's been very rewarding to be involved with the formation of both Open Minds and Stop Mandated Shunning, to build something with very great potential to help millions of people. So the evolution of Stop Mandated Shunning. Stop Mandated Shunning grew out of the personal pain of many former followers of high control religions and the cruel practice of imposing social death on non-believers and non-conformists. John lost half of his family, not to death, but to silence. Not a personal choice, we know, but a religiously mandated choice, co-opting human rights. We started asking, why is this legal? How can this be acceptable? To be ordered under threat of eternal death, not to speak to your own child, your parents, your siblings. So Stop Mandated Shunning was a focus campaign under Open Minds Foundation with the goal of bringing attention, research, and legal advocacy to the very real problem and the real harms of mandated shunning. We know that mandated shunning is abuse. We know that it's a human rights violation that must be stopped. One of the greater things that happened as Stop Mandated Shunning evolved has been our fortunate partnership with Roehampton University in London. We have connected with 2 esteemed researchers, Dr. Savin Bapir-Tardy and Dr. Grendele. They both specialize in working with complex. Dr. Savin specializes in working with complex trauma and trauma recovery with a specificity on religious shunning, honor-based violence, and mental health of those emerging from high control or coercive groups. Dr. Wendy is a social psychologist with a particular focus on group dynamics, social dominance, and coercion, control and abuse in high control faith-based communities. We could not be more fortunate to have these two esteemed researchers conducting the research for stop mandated shunning. Together, this exceptional duo have developed a thorough research survey tool with the target of providing hard data for lawmakers, judges, and mental health professionals. So vital for providing and fomenting winnable cases to change the landscape that we know to be human abuse and human rights abuse. We hope you'll join us in sponsoring this vital survey and research. It is now my pleasure to introduce our secret weapons and dynamic duo, Savin Bapir-Tardy.
Last year was a very exciting year for us because it was the first time that we presented our study at the ICSA conference, and also we began our data collection. And before I move on to the presentation, I want to take a moment to thank and acknowledge those who have supported the study. But our sincere gratitude also goes to the participants that have participated so far. They have trusted us with their painful stories, and we really hope that we can do justice to the stories that they have shared with us through this study. So our presentation, we're going to start with the research rationale. Wendy will present the aims and the importance of this study. We then will present the progress that we have made so far, so where we are in relation to data collection, and then initial findings from two qualitative studies. And then, of course, at the end, we will say a little bit more about the quantitative study that we are conducting. I'll get mine. Okay. Currently, there is a number of qualitative studies which are often conducted by students, whether master's or PhD students. And focus has been mainly on the Jehovah's Witnesses. And what we've learned in studies is that shunning does have a severe mental health consequence. However, we have not to date have sufficiently quantified the severity and prevalence of this issue. And we have not focused on other groups that also practice shunning. So we are hoping that we can collect data from various high control groups that practice shunning, and also be able to capture the prevalence and severity of this phenomenon. Why? Because in order to develop evidence-based intervention to help those that have experienced it, and also to be able to develop policy and change laws and legislations in identifying this phenomenon as abuse, we do need to demonstrate very concretely what is the actual impact and prevalence of this issue. Our study is not just an academic one. We are geared into being able to directly implement the findings of our study more practically, whether that is for therapists, policymakers, or even to inform teachers and other safeguarding training for professionals who might have contact with those who might be at risk. Considering this, the aim and objectives of our study are as follows. First of all, develop a theoretical framework that incorporates insight from former members, from psychological therapists, from legal experts, human rights activists, and religious scholars. The reason for this is to provide a holistic understanding of mandated shunning from different perspectives. Also, as a part of this research, we have developed an inventory to understand, to investigate the level of coercion and control experienced within this high control group. And as part of this project, we want to validate this inventory. And finally, and this is really extremely important, as Savin highlighted, we want to document the effects, the impact of mandated shunning on the individual's well-being. So this study, is it important? Yes, it's important because we believe that the findings can contribute towards the establishment of a legal definition of mandated shunning and its recognition of as a human rights violation, the harm that causes to individuals. Also, we aim to foster a more ethical balance between religious practices and human rights. The findings will inform therapist training programs, and this is extremely important. Why? Because if we want to tailor support for victims, we need to understand the context of shunning, the harm of shunning. And unfortunately, there is still a lack of understanding of this practice and its implications. Also, we want to engage law enforcement, legislators, educational stakeholders, and policymakers. Again, the reason for this is to create intervention that really practically can support victims of mandated shunning. And finally, to raise awareness and with the aim of protect people against coercive and controlling practices. So since last year, we have conducted in total 62 interviews, 43 of which are from former members. Majority are from the Jehovah's Witnesses. And if any of you know anyone from any other high control group and would like to participate, please help us by spreading the word about the study. And also, if yourself, you are somebody who has experienced mandated shunning, or you are a therapist who works with people who have been affected by mandated shunning, or a human rights activist, or a legal expert, or a theological scholar, please get in touch with us. You can either contact Wendy or myself. Now, moving to some initial findings, I am going to talk about the first study, which is looking at how people who have experienced mandated shunning define the phenomenon, and Wendy will talk about Foucauldian analysis of power and resistance in the JW discourse. So we know, as I mentioned earlier, there are multiple qualitative studies that do show the harmful effects of shunning. And equally, when we look at other scholars who often say that actually there is a historical legitimacy to shunning, because shunning has always been associated with religion. And what they also say is that courts do not have any right to say anything about shunning because it is a religious practice. And it is true. So it's very difficult to then associate that concept with abuse. Another thing that a lot of high control group leaders argue is that actually individuals have the right to do the involuntary shun. It's not something that is imposed on them. And if we look at how shunning is actually defined in those studies, you would find that it's one that is dependent on theories and history. So if I was to ask you, imagine that you are stuck in heavy traffic, you're listening to the radio, and that awful song that you absolutely can't stand comes up. What do? Change the station, turn it down, switch it off. It's the same when we are in a relationship with somebody who is toxic or somebody whose beliefs you will not agree with. You can stop answering their calls, you don't meet with them, and that is your right. You have a self-agency in making a decision who you associate with and who you don't. And we, however, don't see that happening when we talk about mandated shunning, because often when we think of shunning, it goes directly against what a lot of the studies who have reported that it's abusive, they don't align. And no studies have actually asked people who have been shunned by a high control group, how do you define it and how you see it? So we wanted for our first study to actually ask former members of high control groups who have experienced shunning, how do they define it and what they understand its purpose is within the organization. And our findings are based on 28 participants, 12 of which are ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. The rest come from the exclusive brethren, ex-Muslim, ex-Scientologist, ex-Mormon, and Amish. Here is the initial findings, and I want to, I want to emphasize that we are still formulating the names of the themes that have come up, because we still have more interviews to go through. So 5 themes we have identified, and I've got a visual map on how those themes address core aspects of the question. So there were 2 themes that directly address the definition of shunning, understand the purpose, and something that we continue seeing across interviews is that they all identify shunning as being mandated. So in terms of the definition, a lot of the participants said it's not about an exclusion or a rejection, but instead it's about your identity, your family, and your personal history being deleted. And another thing that participants said who had been directly shunned by a direct member of their family, they equated the experience to a death. And in terms of the purpose of the shunning that they said, most of the participants, when they were shunned, initially they thought they had been punished. However, after following therapy, meeting with other people who had been shunned, and self-reflection, they realized that it's actually about control. That is, control over not questioning the ideology of the group, control and also enforcing strict gender rules within the group, and overall control over the group. And when it comes to the definition, this was the most insightful one for us, because all participants said it's not a choice and it's not a single event. Instead, it is, sorry, I've lost track of my thoughts. And it is described as a practice that it is mandated by the community and by the leaders. And there are 2 layers to it. One is enforced through directly through formal channels, where there will be, in some groups, they will formally announce that somebody has been shunned. And informally, this is where group members will know what they have to do without being told that they have to shun. And because a number of our participants, when they were part of the control group, they themselves had shunned either members of their family or friends or basically other members of the group. So we, based on the participants' experiences, we have developed a working definition. We're calling it a working definition because it's not in its final, it's not even a final draft yet. But based on the participants' experiences, mandated shunning is intentional, institutionally, or community enforced, and is all about cutting social, emotional, and spiritual ties. And they do that with any individual who is perceived to be disobedient, non-conforming, or if they are perceived to cause a threat to the ideological purity of that group. And in practice, how this definition takes place, first, as I mentioned earlier, either formal process, and despite of the type of group that the participant belonged to, there was some type of formal process. They're not all exactly the same. They have different names, but the cross participants, there was a formal channel where they might shun an individual. And they described the other part is the unwritten rules. This is where groups within the community will know automatically that if somebody has done something that is not in line with the group's rules or values, that they have to be, they will stop communicating with them and associating with them so that others don't think that they also have the same beliefs as them. So basically, they will shun so that they don't get shot. And many of the participants also said that mandated shunning is actually a violation of relational autonomy. They felt that they no longer had the freedom to associate themselves or form relationship with the people that they wanted to. And is cross participants also, regardless of the group that they belong to, it was framed that in the group, the way that the shunning was framed was that is sort of protecting yourself or protecting the person, because then they will realize what they've done is wrong and they will come back and they will change. And that was the most difficult part. And that is the part that we found that actually leads an individual to internalize completely all the rules and the values of that group. Our studies, the finding of this study directly challenges the concept that shunning is not people shun out of their own free will. In high control groups, shunning is not a personal choice. It is not a private issue, but rather a human rights violation, because those individuals no longer are able to meet their basic emotional and social needs. It's a system of coercion. It's not simply about a disagreement of beliefs. And it's not about free association, but a conditional one that is fear-based behavior. Finally, all participants said that it's a form of institutional relational violence. Now, this also directly challenged a number of scholars who often support the idea that religious groups should be able to shun because it is a tradition and a practice of that religion. Others have been less clear-cut, and what they often say is that the religious group should have some way where they can monitor themselves, and when there is any violation, then laws should intervene. But the lines are blurry as to when they make the decision when the shunning is perceived as abuse and not. And why is this definition important? Well, for starters, if we are using the standard definition of shunning in academia and in our research, we are not looking at the same issue that a lot of people experience in high control groups. So we do need to distinguish it as a form of abuse. It has a clinical relevance because, again, a number of our participants, when seeking mental health support, they often found that the therapists neither understood, neither had understand the concept of shunning. and also legally and ethically, in order to be able to enter some debates and bring about changes, we do need to have a more concrete definition of shunning that frames it clearly as a form of abuse. And also we do need to have more practical support for NGOs and other organizations that support people that have been shut from health control groups. Thank you. Wendy? So within our project, we are also finalizing another study, which is about unpacking power and resistance through discourse. And the aim of this specific study is to explore how former and PMO elders, Jehovah's Witnesses elders, perceived and exercised power by tracing their evolving understanding of organizational control and the consequences of leaving the community or being removed from the community. And here there are two important aspects. The first, PMO. John mentioned this term before. So PMO means physically in, mentally out. And these are members, including some elders, who, because of the social ties and repercussions, are mentally out, so they don't agree, no longer agree with the community's belief. However, they keep a facade of devout members. The other aspect is disfellowshipping. So recently, the community, the Jehovah's Witness community, changed, and now they no longer use the term disfellowshipping, but actually they use the term removing. However, because participants used the term disfellowshipping, disfellowshipped, throughout we will use the same term. So why unpacking power and resistance through discourse matters? Why it's important? It's important because it allows us to understand how power within this community is structured, legitimized, and sustained, and how this power also shapes roles, identities, norms, and dynamics, social dynamics within the community. To do so, we conducted 13 in-depth interviews with 11 former elders and with 2 PMO elders. And we approached the topic from a Foucauldian lens. I will explain this a little bit more in detail in a couple of minutes. But as you know, any research starts by identifying gaps in the literature. So when exploring how power is spoken, enforced, and resisted, we noticed that there is a lack of empirical knowledge on power from the perspective of former enforcers. There is quite a lot of studies conducted with former members of the community, with people disfellowshipped from the community. However, none of these studies have accessed the perspectives of PMO or former elders. And it's quite interesting because this group of people actually were in a position of power. And they exercised this power over other members. Therefore, they can provide a, how can I say, a very insightful perspective in understanding power dynamics within this community. They can provide an insight into how power is operationalized, is internalized by members, and later resisted. Another gap in the literature is the fact that there is a limited application of discourse-based power frameworks in exploring Jehovah's Witnesses' power and dynamics or experiences. Therefore, considering this, we aim to address the following research questions. So how do former and PIMO Jehovah's Witness elders construct and articulate their understanding of power, authority, and disciplinary practices such as disfellowshipping and shunning through discourse about their past roles within the organization? Now, we said that we approached the topic through a Foucauldian lens. And I think that at this point, it is good to provide a brief overview of this kind of approach. So according to Foucault, in understanding power, we need to consider the fact, or to bear in mind the fact that power is relational and embedded in discourse. What does this mean in practical terms? Well, according to Foucault, power flows through relationships and is exercised via language, norms, and everyday practices. A second important aspect, according to Foucault, when studying or trying to understand power dynamics, is the fact that disciplinary power produces compliant members. So in this case, institutions or organizations or groups with the power shape behavior. How? Through surveillance, internalized norms, and subtle and sometimes not so subtle mechanisms of control. And this is a very, very, very important aspect. Why? Because through these mechanisms, the members or the individuals regulate themselves. And here we can introduce the concept of self-policing, right? Self-policing. And in order to align their behavior with the group's norms and expectations. So there is no need for the leadership to constantly controlling members, because members will regulate themselves. And finally, according to Foucault, power and knowledge are intertwined. So, and here probably this will ring a bell. So the leadership determines what is the truth. And therefore the leadership's discourse and narrative defines what can be fought, self-censorship, said, but also challenged. In this way, power and control is sustained. And here are some initial findings. There are three main aspects that emerged by analyzing the data. The first concept is the idea of regaining the lost agency. So former and PIMO elders described the organization as a dictatorship, as a spiritual news. They often used or they offered some parallels with 1984. And this kind of discourse exposes the perceived totalitarian control and the loss of agency until the Wizard of Oz metaphor, which is quite powerful because at certain point, Dorothy and her friends pull the curtain, and the great and powerful Wizard of Oz is just a man. And when this happens, when the former elders and Pimo elders are able to articulate this signals a shift in power. The leadership, a great leadership with a divine call, it's actually just men, a group of men. They lose the mystical power they have. The second aspect that emerged from the analysis is the fact that eldership and membership are performance acts. So initially, elders, former elders and Pimo elders, they agreed with the narrative of the community where their roles is of spiritual shepherd. But then there is again a shift, the realization that actually they are mere company men enforcing policy. There is no agency. They described their membership or eldership as something that can be, or the individual can wear, like a hat. And again, we witness a shift in terms of power, because when again there is the realization in terms of their role, in terms of the role of the leadership, for example, reinstatement acquires a new powerful meaning. Some people, when they see the organization or the leadership for what it is, they use reinstatement as an empowering tool. They go back to the organization to reconnect with meaningful relationship, and then they fade, keeping their meaningful connection intact. Finally, the last concept is mentally out but not yet free, and this is encapsulated by Pimo elders saying, "I'm a Pimo elder and I hate it." And this is powerful because it helps us appreciate the psychological split between outward compliance and inward dissent. And this highlights moral injury. However, there is a reframing of the term apostate. An apostate for the leadership is something with no return. However, Pimo and former elders reframe the meaning of apostate as a way to empower themselves and to regain agency and freedom. So some initial reflections based on these findings. So language is both the medium and method of power. When reclaimed, it becomes a site of resistance and also redefinitions of identity and roles. By reframing their lived experiences through metaphors and counter-discourse, this enables former and Pimo elders not only to articulate the harm experienced, but also to challenge and delegitimize institutional authority. And finally, language becomes an empowering tool to define and redefine roles and power dynamics. And you can ask, okay, so what? Why is this important? Try to look at this from a therapeutic perspective. If a therapist understands how power is legitimized, is constructed, is internalized, and how this shapes identity and roles, they can also help their clients to redefine the narrative, the discourse, redefine roles, redefine identity, and help to regain power, control, agency. We have so far conducted interviews and we have been focusing on the qualitative part of the study. We have used some initial findings to help us select appropriate scales to also try to quantify the impact of mandated shunning. However, I will be disappointed I don't have any data to show for this year, but next year we are hoping that we're going to have some more data. So the key aim of the quantitative study is, one, to try to document the psychological impact of mandated shunning. We have also developed a coercive and control scale to assess the level of coercion that an individual has experienced. And we are hoping that the scale will have practical implications for practitioners and other professionals to use when working with people that have experienced shunning or any form of abuse from a high control group. We are collecting data from former members across a number of different faith-based high control groups. And if yourself or you know somebody that has experienced shunning, please do forward the information to them. Here's the QR code that will take you directly to the survey. Thank you. And
No, I would like to introduce Lee Marsh. She is a trauma therapist with 38 years of experience helping survivors. She is a survivor of mandated shunning herself, and she has some mental health insights for us.
I'm going to shift to a much more personal level at this point. Just a minute. But I'd like to start first with an exercise that, if you don't mind, imagine for a moment that imagine for a moment a time you live with a small circle of people, your family, your friends, or a group. Everything you knew about the world around you came from that group, from those people. You trusted them, so you believed them. There was no reason not to. So you did everything together. You believed the same things. You knew and you understood the rules of the group or the family, and you knew what to expect. In fact, you could not even imagine a time, you could not even imagine a time when you would not be included in that group. There was safety there. Your future was there. It was yours. And if you remained with the group. But there's danger. Doing anything that would exclude you from the group, exclude you from the safety of the group, was unthinkable. Being excluded was considered akin to a death sentence, because you would lose your eternal life, but you would lose the life that you have with this group. Like the child who is entirely dependent on parents to stay safe, you continue to believe that you are safe, but only if you remain within the group. You have listened to the stories for years of people who leave and are forced or are forced to leave, and the dire consequences that befell them. There would be no eternal reward. Disease, unwanted pregnancy, drugs, they paint the worst picture possible if you leave. And so safety here is only within the group. Then something happens. Either you are removed from the group because you broke a rule, or for some reason you choose to leave, how do you feel? What do you think? What will happen to you? These groups have an identity. The members share that identity. You are first and foremost one of them. You are nobody without them. You will die without them. And now you are no longer one of them. Your identity is gone. All your family might be in the group. Your family is told to shun you. You have nothing to do with you, no texts, no calls, no visits. You are dead to them. You could be in the hospital and no one will come. A parent might die and you may not even find out until months later. Your family is gone. All your friends are gone. No one will drop by for coffee. They may cross the road if they see you coming down the street, or they walk out of a store if they see you there. Your friends are gone. Everything you believed in is also gone. Nothing makes sense anymore. This was not supposed to happen. One belief of many groups is that those who leave will have terrible lives and die with no hope for a future life or for whatever comes next. What you believe now is confused. Your future is gone. So who are you now? Once everything is taken away, who are you? Rejection versus mandated shunning. We all have a right to decide who our friends are. If we find we are in a toxic relationship with someone, we have the right to say, enough. I'm up. But mandated shunning is very different. People are the closest to you are ordered not to talk to you. I remember being told if somebody comes up to you and they don't know that you're disfellowship, you have to tell them, you're not allowed to talk to me. And you have to leave. So there's no speaking to you, no calling, no texting. If they break this rule, this shine rule, they risk having the same thing happen to them. So mandated shunning is harmful on both sides. Parents lose their children that they're ordered to shun. They are coerced into turning their back on friends and relatives. Everybody suffers with mandated shunning. Mandated shunning amounts to an emotional, psychological, spiritual rejection and abandonment. And for some, a physical rejection on a scale that is traumatic in every way. For many younger people still living with family, they may come home to find all their belongings outside the door. I have a friend, she came home and everything was just thrown out on the front lawn. She was 15 years old and had nowhere to go. I know some people who went home to find their spouse gone with the kids, or to find their bags packed and the doors locked. No explanation. This is brutal. Mandated shunning alters every relationship you have, even the one you have with yourself. All of your beliefs, your actions, behaviors, and emotional responses to life you get from the people around you. And now they're gone, so your identity is gone. Losing everything and everyone in your life amounts to a social death. The person will often experience traumatic symptoms, complex grief, loss of self. They need help. And often it's hard to find therapists who understand the degree of devastation that we go through. Some people will need housing, education, employment. If they're still a minor, they may need protective services, legal services for married people to deal with separation and possibly child custody or visitation may be needed. Medical referrals might be needed due to abuse issues within the home or to deal with physical or mental health issues. Referrals to all of these services should be considered when a therapist begins working with somebody, because there is so much that this person, and it's important to get some of this dealt with before they begin to be able to deal with what's going on inside of them. They need to be safe. They need to have the essentials of life to take care of themselves. So the issue of parental alienation of minor children is may need to be considered. It's bad enough for minor children to see a person leave home and parents separate, but it's really confusing if they see these when a parent starts putting down the other parent and separating or getting in the way of visitation. It's inexcusable for one parent to deny access to the children. The children have a legal right to access to both parents unless the courts remove that right, most often due to abuse issues. Otherwise, the parent that stays in the group does not have the right legally, but they often do separate. And even if the child is older, I know people who they're in their 20s and their parents are still telling, well, you can't talk to your father because he's no longer, and he's a terrible person, he's not part of the group. So that can go on for years. The therapeutic needs of the person is first, well, once you have some kind of stability in your life, figuring out who you are, who you want to be. And starting your new life is a challenge. It's monumental at any age. The assistance of a well-informed therapists can really help their client find the assistance and the services that they need to begin the process of rebuilding their life, a life that they can be proud of. Referrals to legal, medical, and social services for educational, financial, and work training may be needed. Many clients will not be able to express what has happened to them. Many have been taught really to not express emotion. Within the witnesses, high emotional states are really discouraged. You're supposed to be stable and calm so that you can do your preaching work. So helping people to understand the feelings that are locked inside them that need to come out. And because if they don't, they're going to express themselves in psychosomatic problems. So having a therapist that can help a person begin to slowly identify and express some of these feelings. And there's all kinds of ways that can be done. So I used to have a chart in my office, like, okay, so which one are you feeling right now? And sometimes it's more than one. We're complex beings, and we don't often feel just one thing at a time. So helping them to understand that is really important. Many have been told their entire lives what to do, what to think, what to say, where to go, and helping them learn to prioritize their needs and helping them make their own decisions is because I've had clients come in, well, just tell me what to do. Like, this whole process is about you learning how to make your own choices for the first time. So they need to know that therapy is more than just the time they spend in the office. What they learn in the office comes out, and it's a training ground for what they can accomplish in their lives. But finding therapists is a challenge, and there's a whole bunch of tools that they can be used. I have some on my website, but that's the role of the therapist, to be able to help the person navigate through all of this mandated shunning and what it does to the
Thank you so much, Lee. Can you be my therapist? So I'm gonna go through a little bit of my personal journey and explain how I got involved in activism. So I was born and raised as a Jehovah's Witness, 4th generation. So I have 75 family members when I tried to make my best count that are still active witnesses, all of whom are shunning me. The only one I didn't lose was my little brother, who also left shortly after I did. So my whole life was the religion. I took it very seriously. I wanted to be a missionary. I was a pioneer, which John explained means putting even more than the usual high amount of hours preaching door to door. So you can see here, I was about 12 there. It was just, I got baptized when I went over the questions to get baptized when I was 11 and I just turned 12. And then I started pioneering every summer. This is what my family did for our vacation. We went and preached in rural South Dakota. Lots of fun. So much better than Disney World. And then here you can see in my years when I was pioneering, I had a Bible student who I was bringing out and training her. And then I was indoctrinating the children of other Jehovah's Witnesses by taking them out during the summer to go preaching, because that's all we did. But there was a great sense of community, lots of friendships that are very wonderful and meaningful, where they seem to be when you're in the group. And then you realize how conditional that love is, and that you'll lose all those relationships when you leave. Here you can see me at a literature cart, which is kind of a newer way of evangelism that I was in long enough that I participated in that. So when I left around age 39, just realized this wasn't what I had been told. That was the first time I realized that I had to choose between being authentic and losing everything and everyone I had ever known. Also came to the realization that I was not going to live forever. That's a really hard realization to come to at age 39. It's really good if you just know that your whole life, so you can be prepared. And I tell people that what as hard as it was to realize I was not going to live forever in paradise and I was going to die, the things that were really tragic that I lost were the things I could have had, the relationships I could have had, even with people outside, because I was not allowed to make friendships outside the religion. And the ability to have children, I gave that up because I thought I would have children in paradise after Armageddon. Realizing all of those things that I had lost, not being able to get the training and education in whatever field I was interested in, or whatever level of education I wanted. But when I left, I of course thought of the few of my family members that had already been disfellowshipped, and I had 4 that I had not spoken to in decades. This is my Aunt Lois. I had not spoken to her since I was 6 years old. I was not allowed to because she was disfellowshipped, and I was told I could not speak to her. So definitely mandated for children, which is something that the research is also showing, or something that we're also trying to highlight, that this is enforced on children. And they don't have a choice in the matter. So I was able to hunt down 2 of the 4 relatives. 2 I cannot even find, even though I've tried. But I was able to reconnect with 2 of them. And my Aunt Lois had attempted suicide 2 times because of the trauma of being shunned. I hadn't seen her in 40 years. I had it. So in that time, she had attempted suicide 2 times, had dealt with addiction issues. Now she's doing very well. But at that time, there wasn't the support. There wasn't the support groups. There wasn't therapy or therapists that understood. And so it was very difficult for her, more so than it would be even for people leaving now. So this is me with my parents. And I had a very good relationship, a very close relationship with them. And I like to explain to people that the only reason there's an issue is the policy of mandated shunning. I'll get into later that sometimes the leadership will claim that when there is family breakdown, that it is not because of their policies. It's actually just that it's a dysfunctional family. That was not the case for me at all. I'll point out a little bit about my dad. He is what John and Wendy already mentioned, PMO, physically and mentally out. So he has not believed the doctrine for 30 years, but he has just pretended all this time. So he is in his own prison because he's afraid of the consequences. And you can kind of, he was, viewed as, kind of the black sheep of the family, and he would frame it as he was spiritually weak, as that he was questioning. He was very careful not to challenge or say that he actually didn't believe. Unfortunately, for all of us children, would have been nice if he had told us. So he continued to indoctrinate his children. And hide the fact that he didn't believe. But, a little bit of it escaped. You can see his shirt here. I don't know if you're familiar. This is a famous cartoon from Sidney Harris. There's scientists writing his equations on the board, and then he gets in the middle. It says, "Then a miracle occurs," and the bottom, the second scientist is saying, "I think you should be more explicit here in step 2." So, he had his own way of questioning. He always had an issue with the idea of miracles, and if there were miracles in the past, why aren't there miracles now? So what happened tragically with my family, my mother developed dementia. The family didn't know that, but she was having some panic attacks. And at the same time, around the time of COVID, my dad stopped all of his activities. So he stopped preaching, he stopped attending meetings, and that made it seem to my mom and to the relatives as if suddenly he was going astray. And so they were panicking, and in their panicking, and also, again, before they realized that my mom had dementia, had Alzheimer's, they kidnapped my mom. My parents had been separated, or had been married for 50 years at the time. And they forcibly separated my parents for 4 months. And during that time, they convinced my mom to put conditions to my dad that he had to cut off myself and my brother, who no longer believe, and he had to move to the little town where we grew up and where my one believing brother still lives, so that my brother could supervise my father and make sure that he stayed in line. And after 4 months, my dad just gave in and cut us off, and I have no contact with them now, unless I physically show up. If I drive, if I drive hours and physically show up, I can talk to him. But he is, he is trapped in a different way now, and this demonstrates the mandated part of mandated shunning. It's definitely not a choice. It's certainly not his choice, and not what he wants. So I was looking for a way to make my voice heard. And I was visiting this little town where my parents now are forced to live, and where the congregation that I grew up in is. And this is a town of, the sign says 2,000 people. I think it's maybe 4,000 or 5,000 now, but it's not very big. And I went all the way from kindergarten through high school there, so people know me. They definitely know the witnesses. They know my family. My brother had a business on Main Street. I think he went out of business after my billboard, actually. So I decided to put up a billboard for 4 months, and I had recently told my story on the Stop Mandated Shunning website. So I was one of the early people to tell my story. It was just really. Okay.
Yeah, in 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay. So it was very helpful for making a splash and making my voice heard and connecting with other people who are also being shunned, and becoming known as an activist in the XJW community. So then one of the things that I did after sharing my story was attend ICSA last year in Barcelona. And here you can see Wendy and Savin when they were initially presenting their research, and Patrick Haeck, one of the founders of OMS. and then after ICSA, or well, I'm kind of just changing track. How are we going to fix this problem? So also on the Stop Mandated Shunning website, you will see timelines from where there are countries that are doing something legally to combat shunning. So you can read about the Norway timeline. Maybe some of you have already heard of that, but Jehovah's Witnesses lost their religious registration in 2022 because of their mostly because of their shunning policy, because the law required free withdrawal or free exit from a religion, and the state determined that you're not free to leave if you're shunned. The Jehovah's Witnesses appealed in 2022 and lost. They appealed again in 2023 and lost. And then their third appeal was February of this past year, which myself and a lot of other victims of shunning went to the trial. And unfortunately, the Jehovah's Witnesses won their third appeal. So in the explanation of the judges, we can see why it is so important that we have good research and that we can show to courts, because even though they acknowledge the harm of shunning and that it was traumatic, and they acknowledged that they believed that there are people who remain in the religion against their will because they're not free to leave, or because they're afraid of the consequences. But they still said with some doubt that it does not, they couldn't say that it passes the legal threshold for psychological violence, negative social control, or undue influence. It's not the end of the story. The state did appeal to the Supreme Court of Norway, so we'll see what happens with that. But it just underscores the importance of data. So research data that we can use to show that this really is a human rights abuse. So this is the QR code for this stopmandatedshunning.org website. And if all of you here could do us the favor of thinking of one thing you could do to support this effort, that would be wonderful. If you or someone you know can share their story, if you could take this survey, the pilot survey, I don't think this has been mentioned. We need 460 participants for the pilot study, and we have 127, right, so far. So definitely need as many people as possible to take that survey. If you can donate to help out with the expense of the research, this is a 3-year, very in-depth project, so that donations are much appreciated, and you can sign up for our newsletter. So please help us be part of the solution to put an end to this human rights abuse of mandated shunning.
One slide.
Okay. Nobody here? Last of all, we're going to hear a sum up from Dr. Bapir-Tardy.
No one should be punished with isolation, abandonment, or social death simply for questioning or doubting or choosing their own path in life. And I hope that together we can end mandated shunning and be able to protect the rights to think, believe, and live freely, because it's a basic human right.